The Cascade Mountains stretched endlessly under the summer sun, their jagged peaks capped with streaks of late-season snow. The air was fresh and cool, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers, and somewhere far below, the muted roar of a river echoed up the valley. Mark led the way along the narrow trail, his pack swaying with each step, his eyes scanning the terrain like someone who knew and loved the wilderness. Behind him, Lily skipped now and then to catch up, her dark braid swinging against the back of her faded denim jacket. She was 12, brimming with the restless excitement of an adventure promised for months, her new hiking boots crunching over gravel and roots. They stopped at a ridge to drink from their water bottles, the view spilling out in layers of blue and green. Lily asked about the high cliffs in the distance, and Mark told her they were called Ghost Teeth, named for how they vanished into the clouds on misty days. She laughed, then snapped a picture with the small disposable camera her mom had given her, determined to capture every part of the trip. The trail wound downward, shaded by towering evergreens, their trunks thick with moss. Shafts of sunlight filtered through the canopy, lighting up drifting particles of dust and pollen, as if the forest itself was glowing. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing bordered by ferns and wild huckleberry bushes. A clear stream trickled along one edge, perfect for filling their bottles and washing up. Mark knelt to test the ground before pitching the tent, muttering about avoiding low spots that might flood if it rained. Lily explored the clearing, picking a handful of berries, her fingers stained purple, her laughter carrying softly in the stillness. When the tent was up and their sleeping bags unrolled, they sat on a log to eat sandwiches, watching the sun dip lower behind the treeline. As twilight deepened, the forest sounds shifted, the cheerful calls of day birds gave way to the first distant hoots of an owl. Somewhere in the undergrowth, a twig snapped, and Lily glanced toward the sound, but Mark reassured her it was just a deer. They stoked a small campfire, its warmth pushing back the chill. Shadows stretched long, merging into the surrounding dark. Above, the sky glittered with stars, and Lily lay back on her sleeping bag outside the tent, pointing out constellations she thought she recognized. The fire crackled, the river whispered beyond the trees, and for a time, everything felt safe, peaceful, and impossibly far from the rest of the world. Neither of them noticed how quiet the forest had become, or how the wind had died entirely, as if the night was holding its breath. The next morning, the clearing was a scene of chaos. The storm that had swept in overnight left the ground slick with mud, and a mist hung low over the trees, muting the shapes of the forest. Rainwater dripped steadily from the moss-covered branches, each drop sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. The tent stood where Mark had pitched it, but its side was slashed open from top to bottom, the fabric hanging in jagged strips. Inside, the sleeping bags were unzipped and rumpled, one partially dragged toward the opening. Mark's pack sat upright, still full, its zipper half open as if abandoned mid-search. Lily's small hiking boots rested neatly beside it, untouched. By mid-morning, the search and rescue team arrived, called in by two hikers who had stumbled upon the eerie campsite. The team spread out, their bright jackets flashing between the trees as they moved in widening circles. A helicopter thudded overhead, its rotors sending ripples across the treetops as a spotter leaned out with binoculars. On the ground, trained dogs strained against their leashes, noses to the mud, but after an initial burst of energy, they grew restless and confused, pacing in circles before whining at their handlers. The only prints in the mud were the rescuers' own. Any sign of Mark or Lily seemed to have vanished in the rain. Nearby streams were searched, their cold, rushing water probed with poles. Divers in black wetsuits moved methodically through deeper pools, but the current was swift, and visibility dropped to nothing just a few feet down. Radios crackled with updates, negative here, repeated over and over, as the day passed and the mist refused to lift. Volunteers combed the underbrush, parting ferns and lifting fallen branches, their voices echoing as they called out names into the damp air. At the trailhead several miles away, reporters gathered, shoving microphones at exhausted rescue workers. Family members stood huddled together, eyes darting toward any movement on the trail, hoping to see two familiar figures emerge. Mark's sister, Lily's mother, answered questions with a trembling voice, insisting her brother knew the mountains well and that they must be lost, not gone. Posters were printed overnight, grainy photos of Mark smiling in a flannel shirt, Lily holding their cat on her lap, and stapled to boards and signposts all along the highway leading into the range. As days turned into weeks, the search grew larger, with fresh teams arriving from neighboring counties, some on horseback, some equipped with drones scanning the cliffsides. The forest seemed endless, the ridges folding into one another until they blurred together. And yet, despite all the manpower, no one found a trail, no scrap of clothing, no clue beyond that torn-open tent. Eventually, the command post that had once buzzed with urgency began to quiet. Maps that had been marked with bright pins and colored circles were rolled up and put away. The crews packed their gear, the helicopters left, and the forest, vast, green, and impenetrable, kept its silence. The seasons passed in steady, indifferent cycles, the Cascade Mountains standing as they always had, snow-draped in winter, bursting with green in spring, glowing with gold and red in autumn. Wildflowers returned to the meadows where the search teams had once trampled, and fresh moss covered the footprints that had crisscrossed the forest floor. The campsite where Mark and Lily had vanished grew over with ferns and young saplings, the torn remnants of the tent slowly collapsing under years of rain, wind, and snow. What had once been a scene of frantic investigation was now just another quiet corner of wilderness, its secrets buried under roots and leaves. In town, Lily's mother carried the weight of absence like a second skin. She had refused to move away, even when friends suggested it might help her heal. The small, dimly lit kitchen still had the missing flyer taped to the fridge, the paper yellowed and curling at the corners. Every morning, she'd glance at it as she made coffee, her eyes locking on Lily's smile, a moment captured forever at the edge of girlhood. Her brother's photo was beside it, Mark with his easy grin, squinting against the sun, but over time, she found herself staring at Lily's face more than his. Neighbors stopped bringing up the case after the first year, sensing the unspoken tension that clung to the topic. Yet whispers never completely died. At the local diner, old-timers speculated over mugs of black coffee. Some swore the pair must have slipped into a ravine and been swept away by spring melt. Others claimed the Cascades were big enough to hide anything, even a person or two. A few, lowering their voices, hinted at stranger possibilities. Hidden cabins, dangerous drifters, things in the woods you didn't talk about in daylight. On the anniversary of their disappearance, a small group of family and friends hiked to the trailhead with flowers and a framed photo. They left them on a boulder where the forest began, the air heavy with the scent of pine and the distant sound of rushing water. Lily's mother lingered long after the others turned back, staring down the winding trail until the shadows stretched across it. She imagined her daughter and brother still somewhere out there, camping by a fire, waiting for the right moment to come home. Years wore away the urgency of the search, but not the ache of the unknown. The authorities had long since closed the cases unsolved, their files reduced to a few dusty folders in storage. The mountains, indifferent to human grief, stood silent under drifting clouds. And every time a storm swept through the range, bending the treetops and scouring the ridges with rain, it felt to Lily's mother like the forest was washing away what little was left of the truth. The sky above the Cascades was a sharp, endless blue, the kind of day base jumpers waited for, clear, crisp air and just enough wind to ride. Tyler adjusted the straps of his parachute, the nylon rustling in the breeze, and clipped the GoPro to his helmet. He had hiked nearly half a day to reach the cliff known among thrill seekers as Devil's Tooth, a jagged wedge of rock jutting over a deep valley. From up here, the forest stretched like an ocean of green in every direction, broken only by rivers glinting in the sun and the faint outlines of distant peaks. He stepped to the edge, peering down at the dizzying drop. The rush hit him instantly, that mix of fear and exhilaration he craved. A few deep breaths, a quick check of his gear, and he pushed off, plunging into the air. The wind roared past his ears, his shouts echoing off the cliffs as he banked slightly to the left. Far below, shadows shifted across the treetops as the canopy rippled in the breeze. Halfway through his descent, something caught his eye, a break in the treeline near the base of a sheer rock wall. It was just a flicker of color at first, barely noticeable against the forest's deep greens and browns. But as he dropped lower, the shape became clearer, a faded tent, wedged on a narrow, slanted ledge, its fabric sun-bleached and tattered. Next to it, almost hidden under fallen branches, was something small and bright, the unmistakable splash of color from a child's jacket. Tyler's exhilaration wavered. He banked hard to get a better look, his camera jerking with the movement. The tent seemed impossibly far from any trail, the ledge too narrow for anyone to reach without climbing gear. For a moment, his mind raced. Could it be old gear from some forgotten expedition? Or was it something else, something darker? The ground rushed up to meet him, forcing him to pull the chute. He landed in a meadow, heart still hammering, and immediately replayed the footage on his helmet cam. The images were even clearer than he'd thought. The tent slumped against the cliff face, the jacket's color almost glowing against the gray rock. He zoomed in, catching the faint outline of objects scattered around: a cooking pot, what looked like a pair of boots, and something pale near the cliff's edge. His hands shook as he packed his gear. The mountains were full of lost things, old camps, abandoned climbs, but this felt different. This felt untouched, undisturbed, and hauntingly recent despite the weathered fabric and fallen branches. By the time Tyler made it back to the trailhead, he had already decided. The footage wasn't something to keep to himself. Whatever was up there had a story, and it was one that needed to be told. The rescue team moved carefully along the cliff face, their ropes swaying gently in the wind. Below them, the forest stretched in endless green waves, and above, the jagged ridge cut into the sky like a blade. The ledge was barely wide enough for two people to stand side by side, littered with loose stones that tumbled away into the void at the slightest nudge. As the first climber reached the tent, he paused, his gloved hand resting on the faded, sun-bleached fabric. The nylon crackled under his touch, brittle from years of weather. They anchored themselves and began their slow examination. The tent's zipper was stuck halfway, a thin film of dirt coating the flap. Inside were two sleeping bags, both still partially unrolled, as if someone had been lying in them moments before leaving. A small camping stove sat in the corner, rusted and cold, with a dented pot still balanced on top. In one of the sleeping bags lay a child's stuffed rabbit, its fur matted and one ear nearly torn away. A shout from the edge drew everyone's attention. One of the climbers was kneeling, brushing away a layer of dirt and debris from something pale lodged in the rocky soil. As the dust cleared, the unmistakable shape of a human skull emerged, the bone weathered but intact. A smaller set of bones rested close by, arranged in a way that suggested they had not been moved since they were first placed there by time or gravity. The child's skeleton was curled toward the larger one, almost as if seeking shelter. Near the tent's entrance, an old journal lay partially hidden beneath a collapsed section of fabric. Its cover was warped, the paper inside swollen from repeated dampness, but the ink on some pages remained legible. Flipping through carefully, one rescuer read fragments aloud: descriptions of the first day's hike, notes about the weather, a mention of running low on food. The final entry was written in shaky, uneven handwriting: "We're not alone in these woods." They gathered what they could without disturbing the remains more than necessary, placing each item into evidence bags. The cliff's wind moaned softly around them, carrying the faint scent of pine mixed with the sharp tang of rock. As they prepared to ascend, one rescuer glanced back at the tent, still slumped against the wall. It stood as a lonely sentinel over the ledge, guarding a story the forest had kept hidden for 5 long years. And even as they climbed away, the words from the journal seemed to echo in the air, heavy and unshakable, a warning written too late.